Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you're new or if you haven't done so before. This is my pre-fight prediction and final breakdown of George Groves versus Chris Eubank Jr. Let me start by apologising for my appearance in this video. I am recording this about 2 minutes after completing a half marathon and yeah, I'm a bit of a mess, so apologies in advance. I know you guys tune into this channel because of the immaculate quality of presentation with the wallpaper, etc. So apologies if we don't hit the normal standard and you're looking at a particularly grotesque BG this evening. Anyway, I'll crack on without further ado because I'm on a bit of a tight timescale tonight. Chris Eubank Jr. versus George Groves. Fantastic fight. Fight that has clearly caught the imagination of the boxing public. I think they're well matched. I think it's competitive. I think the styles will gel. And I think we're lined up for what could be a fantastic fight. The two characters are well-known characters. They're something of celebrities in the world of boxing. And I think the hype that they can bring to the equation outside of the ring, which will hopefully continue to build as we enter fight week, will make this a truly memorable fight. I think fans of both parties are very guilty of oversimplifying this fight. I think there is a portion of Chris Eubank fans who believe that he is an unbeatable fighter, who believe that he brings a level of ferocity and a level of output that is simply going to overwhelm world-class fighters. And I think that portion of Chris Eubank fans can sometimes be guilty of overlooking certain frailties that potentially still exist in Junior's game. I also believe that there's a certain section of George Groves fans who are guilty of something that I used to do quite a bit when I first started this YouTube channel, which is kind of viewing a boxing fight like a game of top trumps. And I steal this analogy. I've mentioned it on my YouTube channel 3 or 4 times, but my old pal Ultratech Sports said it to me several years ago now, and it's kind of stuck with me. That boxing is not a game of top trumps. It's very easy to say, in the context of the super middleweight division, size, Groves is a 10, Eubank is a 5. Power, well, Groves is an 8, Eubank is a 5. It's very easy to kind of play top trumps with certain attributes and kind of go, right, Groves is the bigger man, Groves is the better jab, Groves is the more powerful puncher, that means Groves is going to win. Fights are a lot more complex than that. The old phrase is so correct that styles make fights, and it simply isn't enough to say that fighter 1 has a more power and therefore he's going to win. So I think this is actually a very competitive fight. I think compelling arguments can be made for both men, and I do think certain sections of boxing fans are guilty of oversimplifying it. I think the fight could be more complex than people believe, frankly. I think it will be a very good fight. I've done keys to victory videos for both sides. And I've talked about distance. Distance has been a recurring theme. For me, Groves has the potential to cause Eubank real problems because Eubank is half the fighter on the outside that he is on the inside. I believe Groves, if he can keep Eubank at distance, if he can lead him onto a jab as Eubank comes forward, if he can make Eubank take a step back, I believe Groves has huge advantages in the fight. I believe he's by far the better long-range boxer out of the two. Conversely, I believe Eubank is the better inside fighter of the two. I think Groves is frail on the inside. I think he's defensively open on the inside. I just don't think he's a comfortable fighter who's at home on the inside. So distance is very key. Eubank, elite inside. I'm not going to say average, but not elite outside. Groves, potentially elite from the outside, not elite on the inside. Who is going to be able to impose their style on the other man? Who is going to be able to control the reins? I think the answer to that question is key. And I think after 2 or 3 rounds, if we get an answer to that question, we're going to know who's going to win the fight. If after 2 or 3 rounds, Eubank is getting into range easily and working Groves on the inside, I think it's a Eubank fight. After 2 or 3 rounds, if Eubank hasn't been able to get inside and is being kept at the end of a stiff jab, then I think it's a George Groves fight. So I think the distance is so key in this fight. And in picking the winner, I think you've got to ask yourself, what distance will the fight be fought at? Will Groves be able to keep Eubank at range? Will Eubank be able to impose himself? So, what do I think the answer to that question will be? Well, I've changed my mind on this a few times, but over the last 2 or 3 months, I've come to the conclusion, which I haven't wavered from, that I think this is a Chris Eubank Jr. fight. My prediction is Chris Eubank Jr. to win the fight. I'm unsure if it's going to be a mid to late stoppage or if it's going to be points. But I do think Chris Eubank Jr. Can impose himself. Now, one of the arguments made by the George Groves faithful is that Eubank's level of opposition has been too low. And the only time he stepped up in level when he fought Billy Joe Saunders, he lost. And there's truth in that. You know, Groves has served the ring with the likes of Frotz, De Gale, Badu Jack, Chudanov, you know, etc. Groves is a more tested fighter than Chris Eubank Jr. And Groves is a bigger fighter. He's been competing at super middleweight for his career. You know, Eubank's fought a lesser standard of opposition, and the majority of them he's fought have been in a weight class below. Eubank hasn't been in with a guy as good at as Groves at super middleweight. He hasn't fought at genuine world title level before. He hasn't fought someone who's this much bigger than him. He probably hasn't fought someone who hits as hard as George Groves before. This is a big step up for for Chris Eubank Jr. But the fact that it's a step up for Chris Eubank Jr. shouldn't necessarily put us off from picking him, because there comes a time in every fighter's career when they have to step up. And whilst Groves is more proven at a certain level, we do have to ask ourselves, has Eubank improved subsequent to that Billy Joe Saunders loss? Now, that's a risk factor, because whilst Eubank appears to be a better fighter subsequent to that loss, he hasn't actually fought anyone who fights with movement and who fights with a jab since. Now, I'm not saying Groves is going to pose the same problems as Billy Joe. Groves isn't as awkward, as slippery, as slick, as defensively capable as Billy Joe, but he is someone who can use length. He is someone who can use a jab. He is someone who can use movement. He is someone who has offensive capabilities and boxing class. And Eubank's opposition subsequent to that Billy Joe loss, Spike O'Sullivan, Dmitry Chudanov, Arthur Abraham, Reynold Quinlan, to me they've been flat-footed guys who've been easy meat for the style that Chris Eubank Jr. brings to the equation. So that is a big risk factor to Jr. You know, he hasn't fought anyone who's tested him in the way Groves will test him, other than Billy Joe Saunders. And when he fought Billy Joe Saunders, he lost. So, you know, we've got to be cognizant of that fact. You know, we've got to factor that in as our equations. And we do have to take note that Groves does bring some natural advantages into the fight. But when I look at George Groves, I see vulnerability. You know, Groves has a tendency to make fights very, very difficult. Could he have kept Fedor Chudanov at the end of a jab all night and schooled him? Possibly. Could he have kept Jamie Cox at the end of a jab all night and schooled him? Possibly. He didn't. He got sucked into a wall. Even the Martin Murray fight, you know, he was making good work of Martin Murray. At the end, you see Martin Murray coming back into the fight. You know, Martin Murray has a period in the last half of the fight where Groves looks like he's tired. Groves looks like he's uncomfortable in there. And for me, Groves is a fighter who's just not at his best when someone takes the distance from him, forces the pace on him, forces him to work. You know, for me, he looks uncomfortable. He looks uncomfortable on the inside. Now, whilst Groves has looked vulnerable, in recent fights he's come through those difficulties. He knocked out Cox, he knocked out Chudanov. So the vulnerabilities have appeared vulnerable, but not actually cost him. I just think Eubank's more dangerous than those guys. I think Eubank is better fundamentally than those guys. I think he's better technically. I think there's more spite in his punches. I think there's speed. And I think that Eubank will potentially be able to expose those vulnerabilities. You know, a point I made earlier on in this video is, when picking a winner, I think a key question is, what distance do you think this fight will be fought at? And I actually find it hard to see Groves keeping Eubank off him for the majority of this fight. Because, let's face it, could Groves keep Cox off him? No. Could Groves keep Chudanov off him? No. Could Groves keep Murray off him? No. You know, time and time and time again, we've seen Groves get sucked into wars, have to battle, you know, and he's just about come through. He's just about found the punch to get the opponent out of there. He's just about been able to last the distance and see out the course of the fight. Will he be able to do that against Chris Eubank Jr.? For me, I doubt it. I think Eubank is coming into his prime. I think he brings a ferocity, a speed, an output, and a punch arsenal that is going to be very, very dangerous to George Groves. I think George Groves is going to end this fight a very, very tired fighter, a frustrated fighter, and a fighter who hasn't been able to get off his best work for the majority of the fight because the reins has been completely taken off him. Eubank's got to be careful. He's got to be aware of Groves' power. He's got to be aware of Groves' jab and Groves' timing. He's got to be careful swinging wildly when he comes in. If he gets caught coming into reins, it's a danger for him. He's never been hit in a professional ring with those small gloves by a guy like George Groves. You know, this is no foregone conclusion for this fight. You know, and if George Groves, you know, has huge success from the outside and makes Eubank look a bit defensively inept and makes Eubank look a bit wide and wild and swinging with some of his punches, I won't be surprised at all. But on the balance of probability, I think Eubank has improved, and I think he'll be able to implement his style against a guy like George Groves, who has a habit of being defensively open, who has a habit of tiring down the stretch, and for me, has a habit of fighting fights at a distance he doesn't need to and getting involved in scraps, you know, that are going to cause him real problems. I think Eubank has the answer to George Groves in this fight. And that's my prediction. Let me know your comments in the section below. Give me your take on this fight. How do you see it going? Please fill me in on your opinion. If you're new and you haven't done so before, please subscribe. If you've enjoyed this content, please hit the thumbs up button. As ever, I do appreciate it.